the one thing that I've learned now that I have teenagers in my home is that I've never met one student, doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter where you've been, I've never met one student who didn't want his or her life to count. There's not one person that says, I just want to be a blip on the radar of life and then just go out into oblivion. Every one of us has a dream. Every one of us says, I want my life to matter.
Hi, my name is Andrew Wells, and I am here with Executive Line doing our next segment of Living Life on Purpose. So we're here with Matt Wilson, and we are trying to share some of our stories, some of our challenges that we had to go through, trying to live our life as businessmen and executives and trying to be a leader. And it's not been easy for any of us. And so one of the things that we've learned is that we can't do this alone, and that's why we're here. We want to share with you guys that and encourage you guys that one is that you can't do this alone and you want to have people around you, but two, it's okay that when things happen that you can call on God, you can call on your friends, family, and do this with other people. And so we wanted to share with you, we got Scott Dawson. So Matt, introduce Scott Dawson for us.
Yeah, so Scott Dawson is an evangelist and, somebody that, again, the recurring theme that you'll notice on a lot of these episodes is it's divine appointments. And, so I was waiting on a buddy for lunch, and I'm sitting outside of Nukes in Mountain Brook, and, up walks Gary Palmer, and so he and I are sitting out there having a conversation. And then, a few minutes later, up walks Scott, and so we get introduced through Gary. And ultimately, we ended up getting to have a few minutes of conversation, and, he gave me his card, and I reached out and said, I'd love to get together sometime. And then you reached out and said, let's go grab coffee. And so we sat down for an hour and really got to know each other more. And really the thing that I like about you is, number one, you're just sincerity. I mean, you're a genuine person, you're a natural leader. But also just the strong morals, and then your reason and your why, your purpose as to why you're running for governor. And so Scott is head of the Scott Dawson Evangelistic Association, and ultimately you've been a leader your whole life, but from that standpoint, went to Sanford, went to Beeson, got a master's in divinity, but from that standpoint, you just felt like you were called to be an evangelist right after graduation. And while some people may not be able to relate to some of that, what you were just sharing with us about some of the challenges that you faced, in life, you get in front of people on a daily basis. I mean, that's your role. And tell me about some of the challenges that you faced early on. You were just talking about some issues with speaking and being a public speaker. That's kind of important. Tell me what you dealt with there.
Yeah, I grew up over in Inslee, west side of Birmingham, and I went to Inslee High School. But growing up, even in elementary school, I had a speech impediment. And so they would always, in those days, they would come in and take you out of class, and where they would be able to help you in those certain areas. I remember it was kind of embarrassing to be able to be called out of class, and you have to go in and learn different exercises. And so when I went through, high school, I was able to learn, and I was speaking effectively, and that kind of developed into, I got serious in my faith, and I started speaking around and doing different rallies, and that developed into conferences to, back in 1987, 30 years ago, it was this month that I started doing professionally around the country, and now we work with Major League Baseball and National Football League, and last year I spoke to 100,000 people face to face. So I'm a professional speaker in certain terms. And back when we got married, I had to have my wisdom teeth out. Ordinary surgery, and I don't mean to scare anyone, this is totally abnormal, but through a series of events, I found myself, when I woke up, the feeling never came back in my tongue. And what we found out is there's suspicion that maybe the person who did the procedure may have been somewhat distracted. And at that point, my nerves in my tongue had been severed. So for a full-time speaker to have that taken away from him, that's a serious matter. And so I remember this happened we were married in 1992, and it was that summer that I had.
It's like your mid career.
Oh, it was like 5 years into it. We were, and so when I first went back out on the road, I'll never forget this. I was in Mobile speaking, and I actually had bitten through my tongue, and I didn't know because I had no feeling in my tongue. And I mean, to look out and see all the people's responses, it was kind of like, I know I'm not really good, but I mean, I've never had this kind of response before. And I mean, I went like this, and I was like, oh, I get it now. So what I had to do was, in a weird sort of, I had to revert back to when I was in those embarrassing situations that I learned those exercises, standing before the mirror and learning how to go through diction again.
Wow.
That if I had not gone through that, I would have known where to turn.
Right.
And so it's kind of, to me, it's kind of come full circle, in that a lot of us really can't grasp that all things work together for good. It's not just all good things. I mean, that would be awesome. All good things work together for our best. But even through those times of when you're either embarrassed or going through trials, it's all part of God's plan in your life if you'll just surrender your life before Him.
Wow.
Well, Romans 8:28 says, all things work to the purpose of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. So, I mean, that's a promise that's biblical, but too often we, overlook some of the promises in a book that's been around for a long time. So the original guide to life, it's in there.
It is, and I'll be vulnerable for you. I mean, it's really easy at that point to get mad.
Oh yeah.
And and then
sometimes it's hard to have faith during those times, huh?
And then you get bitter. You start blaming other people. And I just remember walking through a process that, if you study the life of Joseph in the Old Testament, it was the principle that you can't really determine what's going to happen to you, but you get to choose what happens inside of you. And I think that's the difference if you're going to get bitter or better. If you just make the illustration of being like Teflon, and don't let anything stick to you, and just roll it off your back and just keep moving forward, realizing that He does have a purpose for you, it kind of gives you a different perspective. And how I dealt with this doctor, I went through a 3-stage, through a friend, a mentor of mine, that came because I was getting upset. And he said, all right, I want you to do 3 things. First of all, I want you to ask God to forgive you, because you can't determine what's happened to you, but you're determining what's happening in you. And so a lot of us don't want to go through that. We want to immediately jump to the other person.
Right.
I had to walk through just cleaning myself, asking the Lord to cleanse me. Second of all, he said, start praying for this person. Now, if somebody's listening that's gone through a bad relationship, or they feel like they've been taken advantage of, which that's all of us.
Right.
How do you get over this? First of all, ask forgiveness yourself. 2, man, start praying for that person. And I'll be honest, sometimes when you're praying, it's not a very good prayer. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You got to start where you begin. But it was one of those, because here's the principle: you will not hate someone when you start praying for them.
Right.
God just starts softening your heart. And then the third step is just to release them. To trust that God is going to be involved with this. And I'm going to tell you, it set me free to be able to go on in life. And now, I mean, to look back on it, what could have been the thing that derailed the entire ministry was something that really was a benchmark for our future success.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah.
So you can't, what was that saying again? You can't help what happens to you, but you can choose what happens inside of you. That's really good perspective, because that's what it's all about. It's understanding what we can only control what's inside of us, and that perspective, you can either have a good attitude or a bad attitude. And so, when you were going through that, and how long did that last? Was you were saying you were getting bitter, you were getting angry, and sometimes I think for some of us, it's a quick okay, and I'll just choose to be happy. But sometimes it's not so easy to process, and especially when you got a situation where you're looking at your whole career ahead of you and thinking, what am I going to do next? What was that journey like?
I'm talking. This was not days. This was not weeks. This was months of walking through it, because I remember waking up going, I don't have any feeling in my tongue, and they were like, oh, it'll come back. And then about 2 weeks later, I was like, I still don't have feeling in my tongue, and still to this day, I mean, I have no feeling in my tongue, and it's still some residual that food poisoning. A lot of people can immediately, I can't. I've had several cases of food poisoning that you just don't know. 70% of your taste comes through your smell, though. So it is really, what I've seen is how it's enhanced my smell. But, it's one of those times where it takes a season in your life. That's the reason I think the book of Hebrews says, don't let there be a root of bitterness. Because when there's a root of bitterness springs up, and it defiles many. I mean, it's kind of like kudzu in Alabama. All it takes is a little sprig and it starts growing. And when you start getting bitter, it starts taking your entire life. It consumes your entire life. You start focusing everything around this one issue. So if someone's listening and they're walking through this, and you're going, man, I just can't get away from this. I can't shake it. Well, right now. You're going to have to look at this and go, first of all, you're going to have to deal with yourself. You're going to have to either forgive yourself or ask the Lord to forgive you of the feelings of the situation you're in. Not that you've done something wrong necessarily, but that you've allowed it to start building up in your life, that sense of resentment or bitterness. And then the second thing is pray for that person. And I'm not a proponent of, if it's been a nasty situation, for you to go and confront that person. I think that's sometimes down the road, years and years down the road. But you get to the point where you're able to move forward. It got to the point where personally, there was even legal counsel that brought in, and I had to make the decision. Am I going to pursue this legally? And if someone does, I'm not looking at, but personally where I was in ministry, I didn't want anyone looking at me and go, oh yeah, I know how you made it. You were able to score something. And I just went, Lord, I'm surrendering this before your cross. You take this. And I will say again how I look back on it, and it's the benchmark. There's been other times we walked with my wife through a serious illness, and how I saw the Lord just kind of restore her health when it shouldn't have been. God works all things together for good to those who love Him and called according to His purpose. So surrender before Him, cleanse yourself, pray for that other person, and move forward. Life's too short to be stuck in a rut. Right. Keep moving forward.
Yeah. So from the standpoint of again, we mentioned that you are running for governor, and from that standpoint, the situation that we're in right now, currently in the state of Alabama, I would say it's a point of moral bankruptcy, and we've been disappointed by leaders time and time again, and from that standpoint, I've been in the state 10.5 years now, and some of the things that happened long before I got here, I had nothing to do with any of that, but I know that there was a lot of bad that happened, the civil rights era and all that stuff, and we already had a black eye, but now it's like we wanted to balance it out. So we already had one black eye, and we wanted to get another one. So we've had leaders that just, unfortunately, they've made bad decisions. I don't think that they're bad people, but they made bad decisions, and so I definitely think that we're at a place now where we need solid leaders with strong character and great leadership ability, and and people, as Pastor Chris says all the time, people respond more to vision than they do to need.
Yep.
I think it's very important for people to realize that even though you're an evangelist, that you are running a large organization. $3.6 million budget, spoke to 100,000 people last year. So it's not like you're just a guy on a street corner with a bullhorn. I mean, it's much like this enterprise here. It could have started out that way, but it's one of those things that people need to realize that while you are an evangelist, that you're running a business at the same time, and so you've got what it takes to run the state of Alabama. And so I see that and I know that, but what would you say to the person that's out there wondering, okay, so it's great, he just gave us some very good ways that we can help mend a relationship or get over bitterness, but to the person sitting out there saying, well, it sounds like he's overcome some adversity, but what makes him qualified to lead the state of Alabama?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I know when I'm talking to people, the number one question they're going is, hey, I may like his morals, his convictions, but can he govern? Can he do a good job? And they say he has no political experience, to which I remind them, I've worked in church for 30 years. I got politics now. Okay? All right, I know that. But the only thing harder getting politicians to work together is getting church people to work together. But I would go, in ministry, if you don't have an understanding of business, I mean, I'm talking about understanding cash flow, profit and loss, balance sheets. If you don't understand that, you're not going to be in ministry long, especially in a parachurch organization. The third thing is we build teams. I mean, I've got guys on our staff that are much smarter than I am in certain areas of expertise. If we're going to hire or elect a lone ranger to go down there and do it all, we're going to be disappointed. I mean, it is one of those things when you're dealing with competence of can they govern. When did we get to the point of thinking of career politicians? I mean, it's supposed to be public service, not a special privilege for just a few. And I think about it in a minister's life. Man, if you're a businessman and got core values, can you lead? Absolutely. But to think that just because a person is in ministry, they can't lead and govern, you tell me another profession that's around every aspect of life. We're there when there's birth, we're there when there's death. We're there when there's joy, when there's sorrow, when there's success, when there's failure, when there's crisis. We know every aspect of life. And I'm telling you, the future of Alabama is not in policy. You can learn policy, but the future of Alabama is in the people.
Right.
And you've got to be able to lead people to get us down the road.
Yeah. So
Amen.
good.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Wow. So you
Well,
you went from politician to politician.
Politician for eternity. But my whole mindset about this is to turn the page of Alabama politics, of the history, and to go, let's restore ethics, let's get our economy working, just not only with recruiting jobs, but unleashing Alabama businesses to incentivize businesses in Alabama to grow and expand so we can increase our revenue. And then the third is just for education. We talk about education so much, but it's the largest line item in our state's budget. It needs to have attention to detail, and it needs to have a leader that shows up ready to get us moving in the education realm.
Well, tell us about this. See, what's different about Alabama is that we sort of have a little bit of a short-term bad history, when it comes to ethics. And
Short term?
well, I guess it's a long. I guess we've had it for a little while. Actually, no. I was just thinking about like our recent past, I guess. But your evangelism, you had to deal with all sorts of structures and work with many leaders of all fronts. How will you be able to bring? So naturally, you're an evangelist, so ethics plays a huge part of that. And in the political world, it's very difficult. It's challenging because of all the nuances of running. Scratch my back, scratch yours. It's a very interesting.
It's a dirty game.
It's a dirty game.
But does it have to be?
Yeah,
And I think that's where Alabama's going to have to decide is, does it always have to be like it's always been, Or can this be a new day in our state?
No, it's the definition of insanity. If we keep doing it the exact same way and expect different results.
Yeah, so I think it's really great to have a leader like you who's been throughout his career, even through challenges and even through some of the personal battles that you had, is like still being able to still walk in the faith and still being able to lead others in that, and while at the same time been an example all the way through. How will you be able to change the culture of even the political culture, even in that? Because I mean, that's going to be hard. I mean, you're working with quite a few people.
To change the culture, everybody goes, well, what do? You make wise decisions. You bring on good people. And I think there's one step even below that. And the one thing I've been challenged to is always drive down to the question of why. Because if you can determine the why, the how, the what always seems to play out. And the why is okay, why is it that it seems that we always go through the cyclical nature of corruption? And I think if I'm going to use this illustration, I know it's the fall and it's football season, but I would use when Saban came to Tuscaloosa, he took a team that for 15 years had been okay, but they couldn't get over the top. And in his second year, they were undefeated in the regular season. This is not an Alabama-Auburn spoof. This is just looking at what happened in Tuscaloosa.
He changed the culture.
He changed the culture. And everybody goes, how did he change the culture? And here's how he changes the culture. He changed the mindset. Mm-hmm. And Alabama's mindset has got to be changed to go, we are winners. Mm-hmm. We're not going to take it any longer. Mm-hmm. We've got a great state, great people, great resources. Let's develop great leadership and start moving down the road.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is really good stuff. So, this is Scott Dawson. He's he's a candidate for governor.
I am a candidate.
So that's a big deal. So if you want to learn more about Scott, if people want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
I would say it's my name, Scott Dawson, SCOTTDAWSON. And if you go to .com, you're going to go to the gubernatorial candidacy. You'll find everything else about the race, politics. So scottdawson.com goes to the political world. If you want to know more about the ministry and the organization that I lead, it's scottdawson.org, O-R-G. So just .org goes to ministry, .com goes into the political world.
Wow.
And real quick, I know that we're going to wrap up here in just 1 second, but one thing that I think it's critical for people to understand is, there are a lot of people that run for office for a lot of different reasons. Mm-hmm. It could be the power, it could be, the notoriety, it could be, maybe they just feel like their family wanted them to do it, or maybe they're just a little bit crazy. But, ultimately, your why, we're talking about whys. Mm-hmm. Tell them why you're running.
Man, I'm not looking for a change of career. I'm not, I've got it like I like it. If I was just talking in secular terms, my kids are both in college. We're empty nesters. We're supposed to be enjoying life. But I was just heartbroken over our state of what was going on. And I went, this can't happen. So I became part of a group that just wanted to find somebody that cared, that wouldn't just check a box and say, I'm this type of a person, and then go down there and surprise us. We wanted someone that would think through issues, that lives by conviction, not perfect. But someone who's being molded into perfection. We're down, sharpening themselves and honestly to think through issues with a biblical worldview. And please, when I say that, everybody gets scared. It's not that we're going to create a theocracy. It's just every governor is going to make a decision based on some sort of worldview.
Yeah, that's very true.
I'm just out there going, this is how I think through issues. It's biblical worldview. And by the way, if someone's listening and they go, well, that just turned me off because I'm not a Christian. Well, can I just share real quick?
Yeah.
What Scripture teaches us is to treat every person with respect. And that term respect means to hold in high regard. Mm-hmm. You know what that means? We can agree to disagree and still live in the same community. Mm-hmm. When did civility die in America? Mm-hmm. Now, if you disagree with me, we're supposed to hate each other. Mm-hmm. No. We can live in the same community and just agree to disagree and move down the road in the things we can agree for.
Yep.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let's all live together and get this happening in the state of Alabama.
That was really good. I'm glad you asked that. That was really good. I needed to hear that. That was really good.
But I think it's really important for people to know that it wasn't just a conscious effort to say, you were trying to find somebody else.
I
And
was.
ultimately, you were that person that y'all arrived at, and but you also felt like God led you to do this versus. I think that there are a lot of other things that, again, people run for different reasons, but you and Gary both, I love that neither one of you really wanted to be that guy, but ultimately felt like God was pulling you in the direction. And I think that that's a huge, to me, that's very important.
The first guy I met with was, I wanted to find somebody that was out there like me, and it was Mike Huckabee, who was a former governor, and I went down and met with him. I'll never forget what he said. He said, you could lose your job, your reputation, because in ministry, if you lose your reputation, you've lost your job.
Yeah.
You could lose your savings and lose the election and wake up the next morning and be convinced you follow it after the Lord's call. He said, until you get to that point, don't say a word. So I didn't flippantly one day just wake up and go, hey, I'm going to run for governor. This was agonizing over this because it's intersecting our family. But 100,000 people I spoke to last year, there's 4.8 million Alabamians that need to be impacted. That's the reason I'm doing it. I mean, straight up, that's the reason I'm doing it, to impact our state and move us down the road.
Wow, that's really good. Well, thank you for joining us. For everybody out there, if you want to know more about his ministry, it's Scott Dawson ScottDawson.org.
There you go.
I guess everybody gets that wrong, huh? So Scott Dawson Evangelistic Association is the website to that is ScottDawson.org.
There you go.
And then but if you want to know more about him and his campaign, what he's doing and how he's going to change Alabama, you want to go to ScottDawson.com. So thank you for sharing with us your story, and we'll see you next time.